This is just a quick summary on how I've been bringing up my bobbin thread to quilt in the hoop, because a lot of times if you just bring it up and then hold your threads and let it sew, many times it makes a loop underneath, and that's the top thread looping. So I've been working on this for couple months now, and I've actually made a couple of designs that are quilt and hoop designs that nest, like this design for instance. There's no end to end that you have to match up. The design itself just nests with the next design. So at any rate, so with doing that, I had to devise a good way to bring up the bobbin thread. So whenever I have a design on the screen, I always make sure that I've digitized a crosshair for my first object, and that crosshair lets me know if I need to rotate my design or not, because you know we all hoop crookedly. So my first object is a crosshair, and you can see that if you press this button here, the second one, the first object, so whatever's highlighted down here will show up here. So let's just say I went through all that, and that's a whole nother video, and I've adjusted my hoop and so on, and I'm going to go down to the second object by using thread forward. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if your design that you're going to stitch, if your design is your first object, you need to hit the fast forward button one time to get to the first stitch of that design. But if your design is your second object, well, when you hit the thread forward button, it will automatically go to the first stitch of that second object. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to hit the thread plus, and it took me to the first stitch of that second object. So I'm going to grab my thread, and I don't have a long enough tail to work with. I want it to be long enough to get to this part of the hoop. This is the M1 hoop, the large one. So I'll push the tension release, pull out some thread, just so I could get my finger lightly on here. Push the tension button forward. And then go back to the screen. I'll hit the start button, and then I'll get a warning. And if you don't see a warning, you have to go into your settings and tell it to give you a warning. I like to have the warning. So anyways, so I hit the start button once. Machine starts to run. Now I hit the start button 2 times very fast to bring up the bobbin thread. As I'm holding it lightly, I was holding it lightly here. So then I pull up, and there's my bobbin thread. So now I have 2 long tails, bobbin and top, and I hook them into the spring. A lot of times I like to separate them just so I know which one's the top. The top maybe is always going to be on the right. So now I only want the machine to take 3 stitches, because sometimes the top thread will make a loop. So you have to just let the machine a loop underneath. Sometimes you have to just let the machine take 3 stitches and then pull on, stop it and then pull on the top thread. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So I'm still experimenting with that. So, but here's the thing. You want to stop it after it takes 3 stitches. Well, you really only want to count 1, 2, then hit stop, because we're not fast enough, right? So you count 1, 2, hit stop, that'll be your 3 stitches. So I'll do that. So I'm going to hit start and I'll get my warning. Okay, now I hit start 1 time so it'll sew, but right away I count 1, 2, and then hit it. So start 1, 2, and you'll notice it took 3 stitches. So now I know this is my top thread, and I usually take it and pull it to see if I have that loop. And it did pull a little bit. I felt it, but it kind of pulled itself up to the top, but that's okay. It's not pulling anymore, so I know I'm good. And the bobbin thread will just kind of like, if you pull on it, it'll just, well, normally the bobbin thread will keep there. The bobbin thread will just keep pulling. So at first it didn't. So now I know they're both tight, to be honest. So, and I can't remember which way this, oh, so the design's going to stitch like this. So I probably should have held it over here, but it's okay. So now I'm ready. I don't want it hooked anymore. I just have to kind of keep track of this long thread because I like to bury them. This might be too long, but but it's better to keep track of it so you can move it until the design is done stitching this area. So I hit start, get the warning. Now I just let it run. I hit stop so that I can get my thread out of the way. There. So now it should be fine. I'll just hold it here and I let it continue. And once it's done with this section, I can just loop my thread over the back and it should be fine. So then I let my design run. I have to rip this out because this is fabric that's already been quilted on. I let the design run. My last stitch of my designs, my quilted in the hoop designs, my last stitch will tie off, then it'll make it ties off around here, then it makes a long jump over here, and then our machine always cuts thread after a color changer at the end of your design. So that's why I had to make a long jump so that I can bury that thread. So anyway, so it'll tie off, make a long jump, take 2 stitches that of course you could just pull right up and cut. And so I'll have a long thread here and then a long bobbin thread underneath, and I can bury those 2, you know, the snag it needle or whatever. So I'm just gonna trim this right now just so you can see what my tie-on looks like by doing that technique. So I'll just cut it. So here's my 2 threads, and you can see on the front, okay, it looks like, and let me look closer. Okay, so it looks like I have a knot right there. I don't always get that, but that's okay because I'm going to bury this, and that knot will help me bury it. Normally when you bury, that's almost very convenient because when you bury a long thread as like a long armor, you always make a knot. Let me show you here. You always take your 2 threads and you make an under or a single knot like that, you know. You pull that through and you get your needle and make sure that your knot is a 1/4 inch away from where the thread came out of. And this knot already is a 1/4 inch away, so that's actually very convenient. So I would just take my snagget needle here with the slot in the top and bury this in between the batting. I usually go to the next stitch, but halfway I go under that next stitch and halfway between where it came in and out of, so that I'm not going in a hole that was already made, because otherwise these knots don't stay if you go in a big hole. So let's take a look at the back, because that's usually where the problem is. And here's my start, and you can see there's no loop. It's just a single little knot. It's really nice because I pulled on actually both of them, top and bobbin. And you can see that my back doesn't have any dots. There's no railroad tracks. And that also is because I had to change my tension on these machines, because a multi-needle machine is not made to quilt in the hoop, so you have to really mess with the tensions, and that's a whole nother video. My bobbin tension is loose. My bobbin is quilt in the hoop bobbin. My bobbin is at 10 grams, and I use the digital TOA. Normally your bobbin for regular embroidery is set at about 20 grams. Actually, some people set it for even higher than that, but with my machine I set it for 20. So, and then my top for my Mb4 is set at 220 grams when I quilt in the hoop. That's high, that's like almost 2.2 times the bobbin. To get that kind of tight tension on top, I had to really do some finagling. So I had to put the tension all the way up to 9, and then my pre-tensioner is wrapped around 1.5 times. Let's see. Pre-tensioner, yeah, it's set on number 9 with a 1.5 wrap of the pre-tensioner, and then I have 2 springs in there. So I have 2 springs down in this pre-tensioner, if you dial it all the way off. So, needless to say, I only use needle number 1 now for quilting in the hoop. So that gave me that high tension on top. And that's what you need so that you don't have railroad tracks on the back side of your quilt in the hoop. Now your machine might be different. They might have improved on that or changed it, but I don't know. I don't know if they would have. So I wanted to kind of make this a summary, but there's so, a short summary, but there's so much involved in quilting in the hoop, especially on a multi-needle. Now, I've talked to some people who have other multi-needle machines, and they're like, oh, no, I don't have to change the bobbin and this and that. And I'm like, what? How could you not have to change the bobbin? That's crazy. I mean, don't you have railroad tracks? And then they don't even continue the conversation. So I don't know if it's just my machine or what. So if anybody has any feedback, or maybe they can experiment, I would love to, have a conversation about all of this. But at any rate, so that's how I do my pulling up of my bobbin. Okay, thanks.